Hello everyone, my name is Angela and we are going to talk about all the books I read in January. I started off the year with a very good reading month. My average rating was a 4.05 and I read 10 books, which in the grand scheme of things is not a ton of books compared to other booktubers and things, but for me it's pretty good. All the books I read are fiction and 20% of them were over 500 pages, so I definitely read some chunkier books this month. The first book I read in January is The Stolen Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This is the third book in the Broken Earth trilogy. The first book is the 5th season, which a lot of people on BookTube read and love, including myself. And this series starts at the end of the world. We're in this world where climate disasters are very common and people are very prepared for them. And right at the beginning of the end of the world, our main character's daughter goes missing, her husband goes missing, and her son is dead, and she believes that her husband has murdered her son and taken her daughter, and so she goes on a journey to try to get her daughter back and get revenge on her husband. I enjoyed the last book in this series, but for me, I think that this should have been a duology or else like a 700-page standalone, and I've been feeling that way for a while. Like, I just think that the 5th season was so incredible, and I think that it's a lot better than the second and third books, and I can't really explain why. I think it's just the pacing and the plotting just doesn't live up to the first book, but I still liked it. I gave it 3.75 stars and it was a good way to start off the year. Happy to finish off a trilogy. I don't like to read too many series at once, so typically when I start a series I try to finish it within like 3 months, and I think I'm going to be doing that a lot this year because I have so many fantasy series that I'm really excited to get to. Like, for example, this series, which is what's the series called actually? Okay, apparently the series is called The Extraordinary Adventures of the Athena Club, and the first book is The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter. This book is European Travel for the Monstrous Gentlewoman. Very long titles. This series is just a fucking delight. Like, I sat down to read this book and I just knew from the start that it was just going to be pure fun, pure good times. I enjoyed every second of this book. I enjoyed every second of the first book. I just think they're the perfect blend of historical with mystery and a tiny bit of fantasy. Technically this is a fantasy series, but to me it reads more historical, and the way that the fantasy comes in is that all of the main girls in this series are the daughters and the experiments of famous Victorian figures in literature who are all like scientifically experimenting on women without their consent. And through a series of events in the first book, these girls all find each other and there's a strong found family element, and they are trying to make sure that this stops happening to other girls. And so in this book they are traveling to, well, several places in Europe to try to save a different girl from a horrible fate. These books are just so fun and well written, clever. I just think that if you like things like Veronica Speedwell and you just really like having a fun time in a Victorian setting, you have to check this series out. Highly recommend the audiobooks. I mean, this is a chunker, but I enjoyed every second of it, and the audiobooks definitely help bring the characters to life. And there's also this aspect of like breaking the fourth wall, because one of our main characters in this book is writing these books and she's ostensibly making money from them, and the other girls will kind of butt in and say like hey, you forgot to mention this, or you know, and kind of go off on a tangent. And it's just these little reminders that the characters themselves are actually reading this narrative, and they will kind of add their own opinions and thoughts that the girl Catherine, who is the author, is like forgetting to say. Just a delight. I'm so excited to read the third book in February. Did I say I gave it 5 stars? I gave 5 stars. Next, I read A Psalm for the Wild, built by Becky Chambers. This is a cozy sci-fi where in this world it kind of feels like a utopia. And a long time ago there were robots, and one day the robots just became sentient for reasons that nobody really knows. And so there was this like law that was made, and the robots now live in the wilderness and the humans live, you know, in these little towns and cities and such. And our main character, Dex, is a tea monk, so they use this like tea service and they travel around to give people kind of a place to talk about their feelings and their emotions and their lives and drink tea, and it's very comforting. And even though they love their job, they feel very kind of restless, like there's something else that they should be doing, that there's something more that they're missing out on. And so they take this journey into the wilderness where they meet a robot, and robots and humans have not interacted in a really long time, so this is like a big deal, but it's more just about the quieter moments of these two characters interacting and musing on life and purpose and happiness. This is a novella, so it's quite short, and I think that if this were a full-length novel, I would have maybe given it a higher rating and loved it a lot more. I thought the world was really interesting, but we just got so little of it, and what am I trying to say? I would have preferred like a 400-page cozy sci-fi novel where you really get more context and more time to understand the world and understand the characters, and yeah, I just thought it was too interesting to be this short. I know there's a second book, so I might consider picking that one up, but yeah, just because of the length, I gave it 3.25 stars. I still enjoyed it, it just didn't quite hit for me the way that it hits for a lot of people, but a lot of people, this is like one of their favorite books, so I definitely think it's worth checking out. Next up, I read The Framed Women of Ardmore House by Brandy Scalace. I listened to this one on audio, and this is a cozy adjacent mystery, I would say. I don't think that it is marketed as cozy, but I would argue that it is quite cozy. Our main character, Jo, is a hyperlexic editor who also is autistic, and she has had a very hard year. She lost her mother, she lost her job, she lost her, she was divorced or broken up with, something like that. So she's lost a lot, but she inherits this crumbling estate in North Yorkshire in England, so she moves there from the US. And when she gets there, things are weird. The house is literally falling apart, and there's this weird like caretaker handyman guy who she doesn't really like his vibe, and he actually ends up dead. There's a missing painting. There's mystery that has to do with the history of the people who lived in this house, like in ye olden days. Because the murder of this handyman actually takes place on her property, she is the prime suspect in this murder. So Jo kind of needs to do everything that she can to help the police solve this murder and make sure that she is not implicated. She also wants her painting back, and she also wants to figure out the mystery of the history of this family house. This was just very charming. I just enjoyed being in Jo's head, and it was like, I wouldn't say it was laugh out loud funny, but it had kind of a humorous light tone to it. It's not like a super dark gritty crime novel where it's like super serious conversations about, you know, violence and things like that. I think it's pretty lighthearted for a murder book, and I sort of just enjoyed it as a contemporary novel more so than the mystery. I don't think the mystery is bad or anything, but it's just not the main reason why I was enjoying this book. So yeah, I enjoyed this one a lot. I gave it 4 stars. I think this is definitely an underrated book. I personally have it on Hoopla as an audiobook, so if you have Hoopla and you live in the US, you might have that available to you as well, so definitely would recommend checking it out. Another book that I read on audio is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. This is the second book in the Skyland series. The first book is called Before I Let Go, and that was one of my favorite books of last year. So in the first book, we are introduced to 3 women, and each woman gets her own book in this series, and this is Soledad's book. She is a close friend of the woman whose story we learned about in the first book, and Soledad lives in this really nice home. She is a stay-at-home mother for her 3 daughters, and her husband works, I don't know, I don't even remember what her husband does. Her husband has some sort of like, you know, he earns a lot of money at his job. I think he's like a finance guy or something businessy, and her husband is a piece of shit. And you know, part of Soledad knows that her husband is a piece of shit, and part of her isn't really ready to accept that and isn't really wanting to shake up her life, which is overall pretty damn good. But her life is shaken to the core when she learns something about her husband that completely changes everything, and she kind of has to rebuild her life on her own without the help of her husband, without the help of anybody, and she kind of has to be independent and discover herself and learn how to love herself in a new way. And the man that she ends up falling in love with is kind of forbidden to her. There's like, I don't want to spoil it because it doesn't actually say in the synopsis who he is, but he comes into her life in relation to this thing that happens with her husband. And so she really should not be, you know, into him. She really should not be, you know, thinking about him in this way or considering going on a date with him. And yeah, she just has to start earning money for her family on her own. She hasn't really worked in a long time, or maybe ever, because her husband was the breadwinner. So now she has to do everything that she was already doing plus work. And there's a lot about self-love. She becomes an influencer essentially just because she is this really talented like homemaker. She's really great at cooking and decorating and organizing, so it just seems like a natural path for her. I will say some of the stuff about being an influencer and some of the stuff about like self-love and self-partnering was a little gimmicky to me, and I didn't completely like that. Like I rolled my eyes a few times, just the way that she's like interacting with other people on social media and talking about self-partnering. It was a little annoying, but overall I loved the relationship that the two main characters had. I think maybe there was a little bit too much focus for my taste on Soledad's like self-journey rather than the romance. So I think if our two main characters had a bit more time, a bit more interactions with each other, this could have been a 5. I ended up giving this 4 stars. The writing is just beautiful, wonderful. Kennedy Ryan definitely has some of my favorite writing in the romance genre. This one just wasn't quite as perfect as the first book, but 4 stars is still a really good rating. I then read The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. This is a high fantasy book that is the first in a trilogy. When I finished it, I like immediately went to my local indie and bought the rest of the books in the series. I have an entire standalone review of this on my channel, which I will link down below, where I talk about this in way more detail. But basically we have this Venetian inspired city, and our main character Ren is coming back to the city after many years away to pull a con. She is actually trying to infiltrate one of the noble houses and claim that she is like one of their relations who's like living in another country, because she's been working as a maid for a number of years, and the woman who she's working for was once a part of this family, and they are now estranged and they kind of hate each other. So she's coming back and pretending to be this woman's daughter, and she has all of these details because, you know, this woman has just been yapping her ear off all these years, and so she has all these stories that only like this woman would know, and so the family accepts her essentially. But it's still a very dangerous con. And then we also have some nightmare magic that comes into the story. That's what it says on the back, so that's all I'll say. This is just very like gritty city fantasy with like nobles, but also people who are very impoverished, and like rebellions and crime and drugs, but also the politics of like these noble houses and the people who have all the power and run the city. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think it was maybe a little bit too long for what it was, and that's why it wasn't a 5-star, but I'm super excited to continue. There are certain characters that I ship really hard that I don't think are actually gonna get together, so we'll see how that goes, but highly recommend. And if you want to hear more, check out my standalone video. Next, I read kind of a random pick. I listened to 5 Little Pigs by Agatha Christie on Hoopla. This is number 25 in the Poirot series. I'm not reading them in order. I've read, I think, like between like 10 and 15 Christie books at this point in my life, and I really liked this one. Maybe not really liked. I solidly liked it. I gave it 3.5 stars. We essentially have Hercule Poirot trying to investigate a murder that happened 16 years ago that has already been wrapped up. The person who committed the murder was in jail. She actually passed away, and the daughter of the woman who was accused and found guilty is like, hey, my mom wrote me this letter right before she died claiming that she's innocent. I would really like you to investigate and see if there's any truth to her claim that she was innocent. I believe her. I don't think that she would lie to me if she'd actually done it. So this book is essentially like all interviews of Poirot going around to these people who were involved in this case 16 years ago and just talking to them about what they experienced in the past. It wasn't very long. I thought it was really compelling. I didn't want to stop listening to it. I really liked it. I didn't think it was the most shocking Christie plot twist by any means, but I think it made a lot of sense. I liked it. It was just a good time. I don't know what to say. It was a good, solid time if you're looking for a mystery book or audiobook to read. I think this is a good, solid one. Not mind-blowing, but it might be for other readers. And then I finally picked up Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I have had this book on my Goodreads want to read shelf since 2017, and that might not sound like a big deal to you, but when I tell you in 2017 there were probably like 30 books on that list total. Like, I remember I would go to Half Price Books and I would open up my Goodreads and all of them were classics, and there were only like 30 of them, and it still took me this long to read it, and I now have over 900 books on my want to read list on Goodreads. Yeah. This is a gothic suspense classic from the 1930s, and I absolutely loved this. I gave this book 5 stars. I want to pitch it to you, giving you as little info as possible. Honestly, I didn't really know much about this. All you really need to know is that there is a young woman who meets this wealthy man with this really lovely estate in England called Manderley, and unexpectedly they, fall for each other and they get married. Going into this marriage, she knows that his wife passed away rather suddenly about 10 months ago, and so while she is entering this new marriage, there are just these echoes of his wife, Rebecca, all around her, from the servants' expectations to how the house is run, to the friends and family around this husband, kind of talking about her and assuming that this protagonist is going to act similarly, talking about how beautiful she is and charming and wonderful. And our main character is actually never named, like the female wife is never named, and I think that's a really interesting choice. So you're just in this house with this woman and her new husband and the servants, and it's just so eerie but also beautifully written and so accessibly written too. Like, usually when I read a classic, I'm expecting to be a little bored. I'm expecting to be a little bit like fighting through the writing style with my, contemporary brain. But this was just absolutely engaging and enchanting. I loved where it went. I really liked the conclusion that we got to. I will say the first chapter, I was like, what the fuck? Like, it's just like this dream that she's having, and she's like in the dream, she's like walking around this house, and there's so many descriptions of flowers, and I was like, what the fuck is this? But like, it's so good. Now I'm gonna be recommending this so hard to anyone who is trying to get into classics, and even if you are super into classics and you haven't picked this one up yet, I just think it's excellent. Like, I can't oversell it. I just got the Hitchcock adaptation from the library, and I'm super excited to watch that because I love Hitchcock, and this so feels like a Hitchcock movie. Yeah, one of my new favorites. This is The Wood at Midwinter by Susanna Clarke, who is the author of Piranesi and also Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell was one of my very favorite books of last year. This is a new short story that is set in that world. It is very short. I would say even reading slowly and like trying to really appreciate all of the art, I think this only took me about 25 minutes. So all I'm gonna say is that this is a whimsical, wintry story about a 19-year-old girl in the woods. This is very much this is gonna sound so mean. It's like almost nothing. Like, it's just so short, and even with how short it is, like, there are certain pages where there are like barely any words. I mean, the illustrations are really cool, but I would not recommend spending your money on this unless you are like a Susanna Clarke fangirl and you just want everything she writes. I mean, I love Susanna Clarke's books, and I'm glad I did not buy this. This is from the library, so I enjoyed it. It was just like so short, and I'm just begging Susanna Clarke to write another full-length fantasy novel for us. We need it. We are hungry for it. Even Piranesi, which I enjoyed, was short, so I want like at least 400 pages from her. Like, please, literary gods, inspire Susanna. I gave that one 3 stars. It was so short that I couldn't give it anymore. And then last but certainly not least is Raybera by Jordan Afleko. This is the start of a YA fantasy duology. I'm actually reading the second one right now. I immediately went and got it from the library. Okay, I am struggling to pitch this, so I'm just gonna read the back of the book and give you a little bit more of like how I felt about it, because I really want more people to read this book. This one I think has about 20,000 ratings on Goodreads, which to me is kind of criminal, because this is a really good quality YA fantasy. And something like Children of Blood and Bone, which came out at like kind of a similar time and is also like African inspired YA fantasy, has like over 200,000 ratings, and I haven't read that one yet. I'm just curious as to like why that one got like so much more like marketing push or publicity. I don't know. I'd be curious to know like why that one got pushed so much harder than this one. Maybe it's the publisher. This one is published by Amulet, which I have never heard of. I don't actually know if that's an indie publisher or not. So the tagline is, "What if you're sworn to protect the one you were born to destroy?" Tari Sai has always longed for the warmth of a family. She was raised in isolation by a mysterious, often absent mother known as the Lady. When Tari Sai comes of age, the Lady sends her to the capital of the global empire of Artsar to compete with other children to be chosen as one of the Crown Prince's Council of 11. If she is picked, she'll be joined with the other council members through the Ray, which is a bond deeper than blood. So yes, that is the basic premise, and when she arrives at this palace to compete, she doesn't know what's happening. Like, her mother and her tutors do not tell her anything, and when she sees the face of the Crown Prince, she realizes that this is the boy that her mother has magically compelled her to kill once she is anointed as one of his council members. So Tari Sai her whole life has been trained to join this council without her knowledge, and her mother, you know, for some unknown reason really wants this little boy dead, and Tari Sai doesn't want to kill him. You know, as she gets to know him, there's like zero reason why this little boy should be killed. I mean, we should not be killing children, but she, you know, she loves her mother, she wants to trust her mother, but she just doesn't see why the fuck her mom wants her to kill this boy. And there are jinn in this book. They're called Erus. And there are fairies. Each child has like a hollow. Well, not every child, but certain children have this power called a hollow, and it's kind of like a special gift, a special magical ability. And in order to be considered for this council, you have to have one of these hollows. And so there's a lot of different magical abilities that these kids have. There's really interesting fantasy world building and the lore of, you know, this empire, and also the lore of the gods and the creation myth. So it's a really great combination of like magical lore and like political lore about this empire, with conversations about colonization. This is just so good. I gave it a 4.5. I almost like might bump it up to a 5, because like as I talk about it, I thought it was so excellent. YA fantasy often disappoints me, I've found, which is not really that fair, because like I'm 26 years old and YA fantasy books are not written for my age range, but I just keep coming back to them because some of the premises are just so good. Yeah, I'm just so happy that I got this for Christmas and then I picked it up. Actually, this author just released a book that is set within this world, but not really part of the series, so that is very exciting. Okay, friends, those are all the books that I read. I think I talked a little too much, but I had a really good month. I'm excited to do some vlogs in February and read more amazing books, read more from my TBR, read more from the library. I'm just excited about reading. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you liked this video and you want to see more bookish content from me, and I hope you have a lovely week.